It started with a kiss from a stranger, and ended with a fire, a hospital bed, and a woman whispering death into my best friend's ear. As Julie reached the doorway, she turned back toward me with a small smile. "Thanks, Brandon. Will I see you tomorrow?" "You can count on it," I replied. She rose onto her tiptoes and placed a gentle kiss on my cheek. Her perfume clung to the air for just a second before she spun on her heel and disappeared into the hallway. I watched the gentle sway of her hips as she walked toward the elevator, graceful, confident. Julie was undeniably beautiful. She looked over her shoulder and gave me a small wave before the elevator doors closed behind her. The moment I shut the door to my condo, a voice cut through the silence behind me. "She seems a little young for you, don't you think?" I froze, eyes locked on the door as if I could somehow see my own expression reflected back at me. I waited for the usual sting of bitterness, for the flood of old emotions to rise up, but nothing came. Maybe it really was over. Maybe I'd finally let go. I tried to summon the anger, but it wasn't there. "She's young, Melanie," I said, turning my head slightly. "As for anything else, I wouldn't know." Without another glance in her direction, I walked past her into the loft. I didn't stop moving. I felt an unexpected pull toward the kitchen, a quiet urge for something cold and numbing. I opened the fridge and took quick stock. Fruits, vegetables, chicken. I no longer felt like cooking, milk, Greek yogurt, protein drinks, and a six-pack of beer -1. I grabbed a bottle, the first in weeks. That was a big difference from the year right after the divorce, when they never stayed unopened for long. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable click of her heels on the hardwood, a sharp contrast to the quiet shuffle of my bare feet. I twisted the cap off and placed it on the stainless steel counter, then opened the cabinet to toss the cap straight into the trash where it belonged. Everything in my kitchen had a place, neat, sterile, orderly, just the way I liked it. Crossing the open floor plan, I moved into the living area. There was no clear border, but I knew every transition: the kitchen, the dining space, my home office, the bedroom corner, the gym setup, and finally the living room. My furniture was high-end, sure, but it didn't follow any theme. Two sleek black leather lounge chairs sat beside each other, divided by a thin metal end table with a crystal-based lamp perched on top. A big chocolate brown love seat faced the 60-inch TV, separated by a thick wooden coffee table with a glass top. But the piece I loved most? That was my recliner, plush tan leather, oversized and sturdy enough for my 6'4" frame. It had become my second bed more times than I could count. Nothing matched, but every piece felt right. Each had been chosen on instinct, like it spoke to me. Together they made sense because they were me. Everything in the loft fit. Except for her. "You're not even going to offer me a drink?" she said, finally forcing me to really look at her. Melanie stood there, uninvited and unannounced. It had been 8 years since I last laid eyes on her. I could admit it to myself, at least now. Melanie still looked amazing. Striking, really. Then again, she'd always been the kind of woman who turned heads. It wasn't her looks that ever caused problems between us, it was everything else. "Just so we're clear," I said, watching her like she was a shadow from another life, "you're not exactly welcome here. This isn't a visit and you're definitely not a guest. If you want something, help yourself, but don't mistake that for hospitality." She just smiled, cool, collected, like she was masking whatever she was really after. For the first time in a long while, I noticed it didn't shake me. I didn't feel that old tightness in my chest. The nerves weren't there. That was new. "You're looking good, Braden," she said with that familiar tilt of her head. "I feel good," I replied flatly. There it was. The opening move. The chess match had begun, but this time I wasn't playing catch-up. And honestly, it felt good not to be on the back foot for once. "Aren't you even going to ask why I'm here?" she asked, her voice teasing. "Not even a little curious?" "Oh, I'm curious," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "But curiosities never hurt as much as too little information." That crooked smile tugged at her lips, her trademark move when she thought she had the upper hand. She thought we were even. We weren't. She wandered toward the kitchen like it still belonged to her, and I could almost see the wheels turning. Melanie always had this strange habit. She'd reorganize everything in sight. Spices, silverware, even the hall closet. She'd put things in places that made no sense to anyone but her. And just when I'd memorized the new layout, she'd switch it all up again. It might have been nothing, except that afterward she could never remember where anything was. "Where are the scissors?" she'd ask. "In the drawer." "They're not where they were last week." "Did you move them?" "Nope. That was you." It was a dance we did more times than I cared to count. Now, I watched her glide through my place like she still had some claim to it, her eyes scanning my shelves, pausing longer than she wanted me to notice. The double takes gave her away. She lingered on the framed photos, snapshots of places we once dreamed of seeing together, back when those dreams were innocent and impossibly far off. Before everything collapsed. Melanie always had this undeniable pull, like living, breathing temptation. The wine glass swung lazily between her fingers as she walked, its contents mirroring the slow sway of her hips. She tipped her chin up to study the top row of photos, and her hair, still that same honey blonde, slipped over one shoulder, revealing just enough of the silk blouse beneath. And for a moment, I remembered exactly how much it used to hurt to love someone who could lie to your face like it meant nothing. Someone who could smile while tearing your world apart. I didn't say anything she hadn't heard before. But this time, something in her shifted. A flicker in her eyes. Maybe it finally landed, if only for a second. And still she stayed. I've gotten wiser since then. There's this quote that sticks with me: never interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake. I think it's from Napoleon or maybe Sun Tzu. Either way it fits. Back during the first storm Melanie and I went through, I had no idea what I was walking into. I was blindsided, completely unarmed for the kind of emotional destruction that hit me like a freight train. This time, I wasn't exactly ready either, but the difference was I wasn't going through it alone. In those final weeks of our marriage, Melanie played the part of the perfect wife to a T. She had it down to a science. Sweet kisses on the cheek as I walked out the door, hot meals ready every night, the house looking like a model home. She even started saying, "I love you" more, every time I left a room, every time I hung up the phone. Looking back, I think it was all a cover, a distraction to keep me from seeing the guilt growing in her shadow. I didn't get the courtesy of a conversation when it ended. I was literally standing in line at the company's outplacement center, waiting to sign up for resume help, when I was served. Just like that. I drove home to find the locks changed, all my belongings boxed up on the driveway, and a second restraining order taped to the front door. Cold, precise, final. That night was the first time I drank to forget. Not the first drink I ever had, of course, but the first one I reached for to numb something inside me that I didn't know how to handle. It wasn't a drink so much as a spiral. That single glass turned into a blur that lasted over a year. Honestly, it might have dragged on even longer if not for one moment. I saw her again. By then, I was barely recognizable. I'd stopped shaving, stopped showering regularly, wearing the same clothes for days on end, clothes that stank before I even walked into a room. I was living in this crumbling studio in a half-condemned building from the 1930s. Calling it home would have been generous. I was 2 weeks away from sleeping on the street. I remember the day clearly. I was wandering downtown aimlessly when I saw her step out of some upscale building, all polished and glowing like the last 8 years had been nothing more than a speed bump for her. She spotted me, but her eyes skimmed past like I wasn't even human. Like I was just another shadow on the sidewalk. I don't know what I expected, maybe some kind of reckoning. But when I looked at her, I realized something. I didn't owe her anything. Not an explanation. Not a reaction. Not even recognition. That was the start of my wandering. 18 months. That's how long I was out there. No direction, no plan. I hitchhiked, walked, caught the occasional Greyhound when I could scrounge the cash. I took whatever odd jobs I could find, dishwashing, painting, hauling junk, just enough to get by. But my eyes were open. Wide open. I made camp wherever I could. Some nights it was a bus terminal bench, others behind a church or tucked inside an unlocked storage shed. I learned where to shower, how to find a decent meal. And when something caught my interest, a street performance, a bookstore, a diner playing old music, I let myself enjoy it even if just for a minute. There was one thing I carried with me through it all. A photo strip from one of those old amusement park booths. It was the only picture I had left of my family. April was 4 years old, her ponytail bouncing, tied up with bright pink ribbons. Her little ears were newly pierced, tiny fake diamond studs shining in the camera flash. The strip had 3 photos. In the first, we were all caught off guard, surprised by the flash. The second showed our silly faces, tongues out, eyes crossed. And the third, pure laughter. Real. Unfiltered. We looked happy. And for a time we were. "I could help you find her," Melanie once said later, years removed from it all. "Help you reconnect. But some bridges don't need to be crossed again. Some memories are meant to stay where they belong, in the past. Safe, distant, and untouched. Anyway, that was a lifetime ago. Or maybe just a few years. I always figured it wasn't good enough. Still, I kept at it, writing my blog, putting out columns week after week. Slowly, people started to pay attention. My readership grew and so did the income, just enough to feel like maybe I was getting somewhere. But the truth? I was restless. The grind wasn't feeding me anymore, so I packed up again and headed to Europe. Let me tell you, Europe doesn't cater to 30-something drifters. No youth hostels, no student rail passes. Still, I managed. I moved from country to country on a shoestring budget, sleeping in train stations, cheap goose houses, and the occasional park bench. I walked through ancient cities I'd only ever read about in schoolbooks. I stood in places where empires were born, where revolutions took root, where kings fell. And I kept going, absorbing everything like a man starving for context, for meaning. But back home, the past wasn't finished with me. I found out that someone had brought me up in court, someone who could have stayed silent, who should have stayed silent. But he didn't. In most parts of the world, the story barely made a ripple. But back in my hometown? Oh, it was front-page gold. The son of a prominent businessman tangled up with the ex-wife of a writer? That was the kind of scandal local gossip lived for. Whether it was pride, shame, or just bad judgment, he pushed too far. Filed a lawsuit against me for libel and defamation. That was all the excuse the publishing company needed. They'd poured time and resources into my book, editing, legal reviews, promotional pushes, and now, with a legal target on their back, they folded. Dropped me like a bad investment. In the middle of all this chaos, Melanie resurfaced. I had hoped, maybe naively, that if we crossed paths again, I'd hold all the cards. That I'd have the chance to say all the things I never got to. I even had a few one-liners tucked in my back pocket just in case. But at the same time, I wished she would just disappear for good, leave me to the fragile piece I'd finally started to rebuild. So, why are you really here? I asked. It threw her off for a second. I saw it in her eyes. But she recovered fast. Oh, now you're curious? She replied, smirking. No, I said evenly. I just don't see what you think you're going to get out of this. She sighed. I guess I should be grateful. You cared about him enough to drag yourself through all this. I didn't respond right away. My mind flashed back to that awful period when everything at the company was up in the air. Layoffs were coming and everyone was bracing for the worst. The executives swore they were being transparent, keeping tabs on who might be most at risk. We, mid-level management, were the ones with the bullseyes on our backs. And the CEO? He made a show of checking in, calling meetings, taking us out to lunch one-on-one, like it made a difference. She was listening as I recounted it, nodding slowly, though I had no idea what she was really thinking. So he took you to lunch? To warn you? Something like that, I said. Nothing was final back then. He was feeling things out. Every so often he'd give me an update, what the board was thinking, what changes were on the horizon. But then there was that list. I remember finding it, half buried in a file folder on someone's unattended desk. Checkmarks next to several names. And then mine, with a red line drawn straight through it. Just one word scrawled beside it, Melanie. Only one other name on that list had a mark like that. Even the attorneys didn't know what to make of it. He'd kept the document. Of course he did. He was always a fool like that. The third list, the final one, was printed right on his own company letterhead, stamped in bold across the top. Final draft. My name was gone. Erased. Just like that. I watched Melanie's eyes flicker back and forth, reading something that wasn't on paper, a silent equation playing out behind her gaze. Whatever conclusion she came to, I doubt she'd believe it if I told her the truth. And now you're wondering, I said. But I couldn't even finish the thought. Her sudden reappearance didn't make sense. Not at all. It hadn't even been 2 full days since Mr. Big Money's legal team reached out, asking for a settlement conference. My lawyer and the publisher's legal crew had popped champagne that night, no joke. They saw that move for what it really was, an admission that he'd backed himself into a corner, that he was looking for a way out. But this wasn't your average legal brawl. These guys? They were the apex predators of litigation. Not just sharks. Killer whales in tailored suits. They didn't avoid fights. They hunted them down, crafted them, turned them into art. And they had no intention of settling quietly. The whole thing had done a number on me. I won't lie. But slowly I'd started to rebuild, my mind, my footing, my confidence. Still, I knew I'd never fully be the man I was before. You can't go through betrayal like that and walk away untouched. People talk about soulmates like it's a contract written in the stars. But mine quit on me. Walked away. Left me to bleed through something that was never supposed to be just mine. The man behind all this? He must have been panicking. Between the lawsuits and legal fees, he was on the hook for over $12 million. And yeah, he had money. Plenty of it. But not that kind of money. The Sharks, my team, they figured the judge would eventually hand down a judgment close to $7 million. They explained the math to me once, how my book, being intellectual property, carried real value. And how his case, completely frivolous from day one. But in the background of it all, there was always her. Stephanie Carmichael. She was married to a guy named David, and I always referred to him as the sucker. I never had proof of anything, but I'd heard plenty of stories over the years. Stephanie was the type of woman who dressed like a scandal waiting to happen. Skirts too short, tops too low, always saying things that could be taken the wrong way, or the very right one depending on her mood. David, meanwhile, was the kind of guy you'd see smiling cluelessly in the background, while everyone else knew the joke was on him. From what I heard, he'd been stepping out on her for years, even before he married Melanie. I turned to Melanie, locked eyes with her, and said calmly, apparently he was looking for something he couldn't get at home. Something like BJ's. I wasn't sure Stephanie had been telling the truth when she spilled that little gem. Not until I saw the flicker in Melanie's expression. That microsecond of panic, of recognition. That's when I knew. Stephanie hadn't lied. Of course, maybe she had exaggerated. Maybe some details were off. It didn't sound like the Melanie I thought I'd married. But then again, maybe I never really knew her at all. I could see her starting to unravel. Her composure, the carefully painted calm, was beginning to crack. We'd been talking for almost an hour, and now her voice was gone, her breath shallow. She was on the edge. I used to think we were the same once, cut from the same cloth. But maybe we never were. Maybe we just wanted different things. Or maybe we were always strangers, pretending to share the same dream. Like I said before, even if I had the power to stop it, I wouldn't have. I looked her dead in the eye. I think you should go back to your husband. Let him know I didn't even entertain his offer. And while you're at it, take your fake charm, your sad little act, and your manipulative games right back to him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Go home. Sit down with him, have a long talk about how you're going to survive this rough patch. Because with a love as deep and inspiring as yours, I said, voice dripping in sarcasm, I'm sure you'll pull through just fine. I stood there staring at her. Watching her mouth, those full, perfect lips I'd once wanted to kiss. Watching her as she slowly unbuttoned her silk blouse, that fabric sliding down her arms like it was rehearsed. Then her skirt dropped. And for just a second I found myself wondering, after all those years of self-discovery, of wandering, of becoming someone else, had it changed her? Made her more experienced? Had she grown into the woman she always thought she was? I've been told I'm fairly impressive, she whispered. I didn't doubt it. We made love. And afterward, I collapsed onto her chest, drained and strangely peaceful, like every nerve had finally gone quiet. Her fingers traced lazy circles along the small of my back, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. Then she said it. Jesus, Braden, your ex was a complete idiot. Oh, Julie, I murmured, grinning into her shoulder. You always know how to charm a guy. Later, lying next to her, I remembered something Eddie Vedder once said, the best revenge is to live on and prove yourself. And in that moment, I believed it. Julie had stayed. She didn't have to. But she did. We joked once, half drunk and sprawled across my couch, that if her ex lived long enough to see her happy with someone else, he might die just from the shame of knowing she would have rather jumped off a cliff than sleep with him when he was broke. I don't know what that must have felt like for him. But part of me hoped he really sat with it for a while. Anyway, I spent the next few days angry at Melanie. But not for what she did to me, at least not exactly. I was angry for her daughter. As broken as Melanie was, that girl needed a mother who could show up for her. Be present. Be steady. And Melanie, she couldn't even be that. April hadn't said much about their relationship. If anything, she gave off the sense that they weren't close at all, maybe even estranged. But still, she was a young woman trying to figure out life. She needed something. Some kind of anchor. She was drifting. And I could see it. In our old life, when Melanie and I were still married, our living room and bedroom were stacked high with her magazines and paperbacks. I didn't criticize it too much. What else was there to do in a sleepy town when your marriage was 15 years old and your kids had grown up? We had two, Melanie, our daughter, and Simon, our son, 2 years her junior. They were teenagers now, always out, off with their friends or locked away with their headphones. Dolores, Melanie's mom, found herself with too much time on her hands. She dabbled in knitting for a while, made a few toys, even tried baking. But she eventually defaulted back to reading, flipping through magazines, keeping up with the neighbors' drama, and clipping recipes she'd never cook. And me? I went to the corner store. Grabbed a few papers and a couple of magazines, out of habit more than anything else. When I got to the counter, I set them down and told the new kid, put it on my tab for now. He looked confused. Sorry, sir. It's my first day. I'm still figuring things out. I don't really know where the tab is or how it works, so I'll have to ask you to pay cash. He looked so apologetic it was almost comical. Can't you just call Derek? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He'll show you. Or, if you want to know where the magazines go, they're in the second drawer to your right. He glanced down at the drawer, then back at me, eyes wide. Somehow, that felt like the perfect metaphor for my life. I knew exactly where everything belonged, even if I no longer needed any of it. I nodded, hesitated a second, then stepped inside. I heard you weren't feeling well, I said quietly. Figured I'd check in. He gave a weak chuckle, but it turned into another coughing fit. Good Lord, you look terrible, I said. You really ought to be in a hospital. I already had the doctor over, Derek replied, voice raspy. He examined me, poked and prodded, but found nothing. Told me I should go to the hospital anyway just to be safe. He coughed again, dry, relentless. What do you think it is? He shrugged. Probably the flu. Maybe food poisoning or something. You know, my new wife's not exactly a 5-star chef. I raised an eyebrow. That's not something you just brush off. You need to go. He waved it off like it was a joke, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't so sure. Later that day, I was walking past their house when I saw smoke pouring out through the kitchen window. My heart leapt. I sprinted over, grabbed the extinguisher by the garden steps, and burst through the front door like a firefighter on instinct. But there were no flames. Only thick, gray smoke coiling out from the oven, curling toward the ceiling. It was escaping through the open window as if even the smoke was trying to flee. Dolores stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, spatula still in hand, face flushed with frustration. What on earth happened here? I asked, coughing as the haze hit my lungs. She turned to me, equal parts startled and furious. This is insane. I followed the same recipe I always do. I've baked that stupid chicken 100 times. But the charred remains told another story. She stormed out, mumbling something about broken timers and bad thermostats, and I was left alone to open the windows wider and let the smoke drift out into the cold air. A few days later, I found her sitting in front of her laptop, eyeing an ad for a fortune teller in a neighboring town. It was tucked between recipes and a gossip article about celebrity divorces. She seemed fixated. I'm going, she muttered. They say she knows things. It took a solid hour of reasoning, pleading, and logic to convince her not to waste her time chasing crystal balls and cryptic nonsense. I tried to make sense of it all, rationalize what felt irrational. She was unraveling in her own quiet, chaotic way. Meanwhile, Derek finally agreed to go to the hospital. I drove him myself. He went through a full battery of tests, scans, blood work, specialists, and still nothing. No cause. No explanation. When I came back to visit him a few days later, he was asleep in his room. But something felt wrong. Through the window in the hallway I saw her. A woman dressed in dark, flowing clothes. She leaned over him like a shadow, whispering something I couldn't quite hear, until I caught one sentence that made my stomach twist. Get them out of my head. The words hung there, thick as fog, even after she vanished. I didn't go inside. I just stood there for a long moment, watching my friend sleep, looking more peaceful than he had in days. Then I turned and walked home. I needed to talk to my wife. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe an honest explanation, maybe even a confession. All I knew was that I couldn't live in the dark any longer. I needed answers. On the drive home, my thoughts were a blur of everything that had gone wrong in the past few days. Misfires, accidents, strange illnesses, burned dinners, smoke and shadows, it all stacked up until it felt like we were living under some kind of curse. As ridiculous as it sounded, I found myself thinking, what if someone actually did curse us? Dolores came to mind instantly. Dolores. I called out as I stepped into the house, slamming the door a little harder than I meant to. No response. I found her upstairs, sitting on the edge of the bed, her posture stiff, her face pale and tense. Her lips were drawn into a grim line, as though she'd been waiting for this moment. This was it, the conversation I'd been playing over in my mind for hours. How long? I asked, my voice even steady. How long have you been sleeping with Derek? Her head jerked up. What? She gasped, her eyes wide, fear surfacing before she could hide it. You heard me, I said, staring straight at her. Answer while I'm still willing to listen calmly. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, her face twisted with guilt. That silence, that hesitation, was all the confirmation I needed. So it's true, I said quietly, like an exhale. She dropped her gaze to the floor, stumbling through some half-formed excuses that even she didn't seem to believe. Her voice cracked. Regret started to color her words, followed by something like grief. In that moment she seemed to unravel. One second she was crying and the next her face turned pale with horror, like she'd just realized how deep this had all gone. How far the damage had reached. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I don't know what to do. She clutched the sides of her skirt, hands trembling, and for a second, I almost felt pity. Almost. Instead, I just watched her fall apart, keeping a straight face, even though I found something bitterly amusing about the way she squirmed. I didn't laugh though. I didn't want her to know I was already past pain and deep into mockery. Yes, Dolores. It's all you're doing, I said coldly. And because of that, we're all suffering, me, the kids. You may not care about me anymore, but don't you feel anything for them? Her expression changed again. Something raw flashed through her eyes and for a moment I thought maybe it had finally hit her. We need to see the fortune teller, she said suddenly, desperate, like she was clinging to the idea of fixing things with magic now that reality had crumbled. That was the moment I knew she was truly lost. Later that night, after she had gone quiet, I sat down and pulled out an old notebook. The kind of thing you keep tucked away and forget about until you suddenly need it again. I was looking for a name I hadn't said aloud in years. Joseph. He was the only one I thought might actually help, or at the very least talk to me without judgment. It took a while to find the book and even longer to flip through the worn pages. As I sat there, it hit me how much time had passed. Our paths had diverged so long ago. We never kept in touch, not really. Still, there it was, his number. I punched it in without hesitation. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. Of course. Maybe he changed it. Maybe it had been disconnected years ago. But underneath the number I saw his old address, scribbled in faded ink. Was worth a shot. The house was still there and his parents answered the door. They were kind, surprised to see me, sure, but welcoming. They told me Joseph had moved downtown, started his own agency right in the city center. I thanked them, got the address, and stepped back out into the fading afternoon light. The roads ahead were full of traffic lights, detours, and noise, but at least now I had a direction. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at pulling myself out of the wreckage. I found him faster than I expected. The moment our eyes met, despite the years that had passed and the changes in our faces, we recognized each other immediately. Time may wear on the body, but the bond we had, it was still there. Joseph smiled wide, genuinely glad to see me, and pulled out a bottle of aged cognac from a shelf behind his desk. Been saving this one for a special occasion, he said, dusting off the bottle's neck. This feels like it. We started with small talk, memories of old times, names we hadn't said out loud in decades, and moments that once felt like lifetimes. At one point, we laughed so hard tears welled up in Joseph's eyes. Felt good. Needed. I invited him to grab dinner, and afterward, I asked if he'd come with me to the hospital. I needed him to see Derek for himself. Derek was still unconscious, lying there like a statue, motionless, silent. Joseph didn't waste time. He went into his methodical mode, firing off questions at the attending physicians, scribbling notes into a small leather-bound notebook he pulled from his coat. After a while he turned to me. I need to talk to the woman they say caused all this. You mean Alice? He nodded. You really think she's just going to open up to you? I asked. I mean, who would confess to something like this? Maybe she won't, he said calmly. But sometimes people reveal more than they mean to. When we got to Alice's house, she greeted us with that same unsettling calm, the kind that clings to the air like bad perfume. She made small talk at first, feigning warmth. But her tone shifted when Joseph brought up Derek. Oh, you mean the illness? She said, tilting her head. Didn't he tell you it might be inherited? I looked at her, stunned. No. He didn't mention that. She smirked, with that dry, ironic tone only people with secrets seem to master. Well, I suppose there were a lot of things he didn't tell you. My stomach turned. I couldn't help but think of Dolores again. Of her betrayal. Joseph, sensing her defensiveness, got clever. He clutched his stomach and asked where her bathroom was. She pointed down the hall. I knew he wasn't sick, he needed a reason to snoop around. I played along. While he was gone, I kept Alice distracted, feeding into her fantasy. I pretended to believe in her power. I even begged her to spare Dolores and Derek too. She didn't budge. No flinch. No guilt. When Joseph came back, he nodded to me slightly, subtle, but I knew something had clicked. Later we left the hospital and went straight to the police. Joseph didn't need to explain himself much. His reputation preceded him. Within minutes he had them listening. He presented enough cause to open a case against Alice Morales, suspicion of attempted murder, among other charges. He promised to deliver the rest of the evidence soon. As it turned out, Alice was the sister of the fortune teller I'd visited weeks before. Both of them were seasoned scammers, known in other towns for playing people like chess pieces. Recently they'd fallen out. Alice had left and started a new scam in our city, alone this time. And somehow we'd all been pulled into it. Back home I sat across from Dolores again. Everything was quiet except the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. "I believed in you," I said quietly. "All these years. And you still betrayed me. Not just me, my love for you." She looked down, silent for the first time. Maybe finally realizing the depth of what she'd done. "I just need to know," I continued. "What made you do it? What was I missing? I didn't hurt you. I didn't cheat. I don't understand." Her voice was soft. Tired. "I don't know," she said. "We talked about romance novels so often at the club. My girlfriends would brag about trying to live like the characters. Pretend they were in some passionate drama. I guess I started pretending too. Pretending. That word sat in the air like dust. Pretending to be in love. Pretending to be loyal. Pretending this wasn't real life with real people getting hurt. And all for what? A fantasy?